This is the third seminar with J. Krishnamurti in Ojai, California, 1979.
I think we said yesterday that we would go take into this one question. What is the root cause of all this confusion, insecurity, misery, the whole human things that are happening in the world actually now? Is that all right? That's what we said we would discuss. You agree? I wonder if you are aware of what is actually going on in the world. Every morning, every newspaper says a murder, somebody is killed. You know, all that's happening. And our society is pretty immoral, right? Not only in this country, but also in Europe and in India and Asia. And apparently from time immemorial, man has lived this way. In confusion, in terror, in insecurity, fighting each other, killing each other. And there have been various philosophers and saints and leaders and teachers who have tried to alter the course of society, try to help them to become good men. We won't define the good, we did it yesterday and day before. And apparently they have not succeeded at all. Catholic world has said there was a unity of the Catholic world at one time. It's all broken up into Protestantism and so on and so on. Seeing all these actual facts, not my invention, the overpopulation, poverty, real insecurity, and so on. And this we call a mess, a confusion, an irresponsible action on the part of each individual that has produced this chaos. Now we're trying to find out what is the cause of this. Is it lack of leadership? Either in the political world or in the religious world? Is it lack of total dishonesty? Honesty, rather. I met somebody the other day from Russia, and he was saying that one lives all one's life, there is a series of lies. And if you heard yesterday on the television, the impossible position of the Israel, surrounded by all this antagonistic spirit, and at war, throwing bombs and so on. And if you've been to India, you see the appalling poverty, dirt, squalor, unimaginable things that are going on right throughout the world. The Greeks had an answer to it. As far as I've heard, I'm not a Greek philosopher or read Greek, but their philosophy, Aristotle said various things to bring about a good society. He defined what a good society should be. And also in India, various teachers have proclaimed what kind of society it should be. And apparently, a good society is not coming to be. Perhaps because there are no good men. And why aren't there good men after all this millennia? Why? What's wrong with humanity? You would say, what's wrong with us? Because we are the human beings. We represent the world psychologically. And why aren't we good? And we are investigating why society lives in this utter contradiction, confusion, insecurity, and danger. What is the root of it? So we're all grown-up people, and if you're asked that question, how do you answer it? Because you must answer it, because we're part of society. Not verbal, theoretical opinions and all the rest of that business, but what's your answer? Is it we are all so concerned with ourselves, our own problems, our own opinions, beliefs, our own experiences, our own personal security, our own intimate relationship, and we are caught up in that and we haven't resolved it and we are not concerned with the rest of the world? Is it because we are so heavily conditioned that we cannot see beyond our nose? These are the questions, so one must answer all these questions. Not theories, not explanation and description, but the fact, am I living in this world which is so utterly confused? And as a citizen of this world, am I so concerned with my own petty little backyard, my own attachments, my own dependence, my fears, enclosing myself more and more and more? Or is it that we haven't found a right religious teacher? That sounds very funny. But all the churches, all that nonsense, all that goes on. I had a lovely evening yesterday with some Dr. Sharon, something or other, saying if you love Jesus, you will love mankind. If you love Christ and look up to Him, you are part of Him, and in 20th century. And he's got an enormous following in Los Angeles. It's also crazy. So when you are realizing all this, the wars, the terror, the bombs of various kinds, man spending millions and millions on armaments, seeing all that, how do we, living in the society of which we are a part, how do we become good men or be good men? And what is the cause of this lack of goodness? Which is the same as what is the cause of this utter confusion in the world? I have explained this. Now let's discuss it. Let's go into it. What's the root cause of it? Answers. How do you explore this question? What's your response to this challenge? How do you inquire, investigate into the cause of this tremendous catastrophe? So people don't know how to set about to discover the cause of this confusion. They withdraw from it, go off into little communes, join little sects, follow this guru or that, or join some institution, avoiding the central issue. If you are doing that, we can't discuss. We have no communication with each other. But since we are here, I presume seriously that you're a group of people who are serious. Are not just concerned about their own problems, which will be solved if we investigate the central issue. From that, all other problems can be investigated and resolved. Whether my wife dominates me or she dominates, or all that kind of silly nonsense that people play with. May I? Huh? I can go on investigating, but...
Krishnaji, it seems evident that mankind does not know how to approach that question.
Do you know how to approach that question? No, don't say mankind. You. Fritz, do you know? Do you have... Does this challenge mean anything to you? Does it mean you say, well, I must find out at any cost? Or do you have enough energy to put your whole heart into this? Is it because from the ancient Greeks to modern philosophers and writers and thinkers, as in also in Asia, in India, we have lived on concepts. Do you understand what I mean? On concepts being, or those things that come into our minds and translated into words and pursue that idea and see how ideas can influence man. You follow what I mean? Am I making myself clear? Not quite.
Don't you think that even before people got caught in concepts, there was still trouble that from very early times there was jealousy and fear and, the wish to dominate?
Yes, but that existed. There is fear, there is sorrow, there is pain, there is anxiety.
People
but
could not handle that. And people didn't know what to do with that.
Yes, I was going, that's not knowing what to do, ideas come into our minds, what should be done about them.
Right, that was the next stage.
Yeah. So concepts became much more real, much more active than the actual fact of our daily misery. Would you say that?
Well, in some people perhaps.
Isn't the daily misery always more compelling? Isn't the beginning of all these things in anybody's life a sense of pressure which is based on circumstance of that person's life? All the violence surely has pressure behind it. People think they need whatever it is. They need freedom, they need food, they need whatever. And that sense of pressure then drives them to do these things. And drives a whole, it becomes a motivation, which maybe then becomes a concept.
I think some people have attempted to solve this through concepts, say the ancient Greeks and onward, and others have tried to solve it in other ways. For example, if you take the American history, people felt highly dissatisfied. That's basically the motive behind the whole movement. So they moved further and further west in the hope that there they would find something better. They eventually ended up in California. Where there's no further west to go. But that was a great dream of the United States, which gave it tremendous energy to overcome the great obstacles to crossing the desert and so on.
Is it, sir, are you saying that not being able to resolve our problems, fear, all the rest of it, we move away from them,
Yes.
and in the very moving away from them, we create ideals, concepts, what is the purpose, and so on.
Yes, a concept was created of the West as the place where things would be better, you see.
Yeah, concept would be better. Quite.
The world, life would be better.
So, can we say this? That we live on concepts?
They provide the drive, the motivation to act. They provide the drive to act, the motivation.
Yes, that's what I mean.
The energy.
We derive from concepts energy. And that energy still doesn't solve our problem. Right? Would we agree to that so far?
There's something I'm not quite sure. There's energy in the problem, and there's a different energy in the concept. The energy of fear, suffering, the thing that's moved away from. That also is a generating, driving energy.
Yes, sir, but moving away from it
that comes from
into some ideal.
Yes. I was just thinking there's another source of energy other than the concept.
No,
There's this
look at it, sir. I'm frightened.
Yeah.
One is frightened. I don't know how to resolve this fear. So I move away from it.
into a concept.
And say, I must not be afraid, and the desire not to be afraid is stronger than fear itself.
The concept of non-fear.
So I mustn't be afraid. I must develop courage, and that gives me tremendous energy. Take all wars. Look what man has been through. So I'm asking myself whether human beings, not being able to resolve their fears, anxieties and so on, have cultivated ideals, concepts, formulas, a philosophy of life which is not related to the actual, but related to some idea that I have with which I act upon the actual.
I think people form the idea of a concept of what would be right and perfect and what would solve all their problems.
Yes. Jesus is perfect.
Yeah.
If I can worship him, he will solve my problem.
And then that gives tremendous energy to act. No?
Yes. Look, the missionaries, the whole religious world, what it has done.
They've overcome tremendous obstacles.
Sir, if you excuse me a moment, there's something that is not clear to me, and that is the way we frame the question. We say, what is the root cause of all this calamity, right? That seems to kind of demand, perhaps not necessarily, but it seems to demand one particular thing, and somehow it seems as though the problem is very complex. There seem to be very many factors.
All right, sir, give all the factors. Poverty, overpopulation,
Yes, insensitivity.
lack of leadership politically,
Yes,
lack of the people who talk about religion have actual experience of religious mind, right?
yes. Not caring, not.
And they don't have it.
Yes.
They pretend that they have it. They assume they have it, but actually they haven't got it. So give all the explanations, but the explanations point merely to a central issue. Whether it's a communist explanation, or the Hindu Vedantic, or the Hindu non-duality, and so on, I won't go into all that. All these expressions, all these various contradictions, various implications, put them all together. At the end of it, I'm asking, why is man living like this?
But I think that the question has been raised, is there a central issue? You see, we have to discuss that some people might feel that there is no central issue, that it's a tremendous mass of complexity.
It's a multidimensional.
I don't say that I agree or disagree, but it's a thing that some people have said. Right?
Yes, I know some people. I know, as it's such a complex question, there is no central issue.
That's one approach, yes.
There is no any particular approach.
And you must consider them all piecemeal,
Yes.
if that's the case.
Will you, taking piecemeal, solve this problem?
Well, we have to. Some people believe it can be done. You see, for example, some
Do it, sir. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So when you make a dividing line between the pull of a concept, when it becomes concept, and when it is still within the realm of actual either need or intolerable circumstance. If I'm hungry, it's not a concept that I've got to be well fed. I'm hungry. If I'm
talking
suffering, when does it get over into the impetus being because of an ideal or a concept? And when is it just more primary, which is a human condition that isn't an idea?
What would you have to say?
Well, for instance, take hunger.
Take?
If I'm hungry, I'm not hungry because I have an ideal that I must be...
No, that's an actual fact.
Exactly. If I live in some intolerable physical circumstances or oppression or I'm persecuted or whatever it is, those things are impelling me. Is that what's pushing me? Or the idea that I must be free, I must be whatever? When is the idea take over and when is it actual circumstance that is the motive, that is the root?
Sorry, your question not clear to me. Perhaps somebody it's clear to others.
David, do I make
Well,
sense?
yeah, well, I think the issue is something like this, that let's say people started out with some serious problems of hunger and fear and fear of the unknown in nature and so on, and then not being able to solve them, they projected ideals which gave them energy in a false way. For example, they projected the ideal of religion or of noble, some noble aristocracy, or various ideas were projected philosophically and otherwise, which became the driving force, which was more powerful than the original hunger. There's people with those ideals that even ignore hunger and drive ahead to great lengths.
So are we saying then that when it becomes destructive is when you move into the realm of concept rather than the fact of...
That's what he's saying, that's what I'm saying, yes.
Etc. The minute it becomes into the idea...
An idea which overpowers... See, an idea might be the servant of the real thing, but in this case the idea becomes the master. It overpowers everything else.
So if we're asking the root, it's the minute it becomes the idea.
Yeah, there's the dominant factor.
So what is the meaning of the word idea?
Well, it's an old Greek word, but the original
I know.
meaning is
I've looked it up too. What does it mean? You tell me. I know.
Well, all right. It's idein, which is a verb to see, and as the original meaning, it was meant a kind of perception.
Perception. That's
but it
all.
got changed. There's another word in Greek, eidolon, which means image, having the same root.
Yeah.
So you have a confusion there between perception and the image, which is in that word.
Perception and then image.
Yeah, the both words have the same root.
Same, I know. So there's perception,
Yeah.
and the creation of the image
After.
after.
And the idol comes from that too,
Of
the
course,
idol
of
which
course.
you worship.
Of course. Perception, image, idol.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we when we perceive something, that flower, why do we make an idea of it?
Well, I think it's a broad question. See, in certain cases it's necessary, let's say, to make an idea of what we are doing, to make a plan.
Agreed.
So we cannot depend entirely on perception to make a plan for how
No,
to proceed.
that's obvious.
Yeah. Now then we might extend that into the flower or into some other area where it doesn't belong. Right?
So, perception with image at certain level, at certain dimension, it is necessary.
Yes.
But it becomes totally unnecessary and dangerous when perception becomes an image and I live in that image.
Yeah, I worship it. You see that?
Yeah, I worship that image and so on.
You make the image of God and worship it.
Yeah,
You ask, why did people feel the need to make an image of God? You see, that's an interesting question.
So is that what we have done? We have perceived hunger, we have perceived fear, we have perceived anxiety, and then create an image out of that perception, and that image telling us we must be free from that fear. Is that what is
tells
going
you
on?
how to be free.
Huh?
It suggests how you may be free. You see it just as the image tells you what to do in practical affairs.
So therefore we use that image in practical affairs, carry it over to psychological field. I don't know if they're all following this.
I assume that when we make an abstraction out of a fact, then the trouble starts.
Well, you have to make an abstraction, you see, but it's when the abstraction begins to dominate. See, I think the notion of the gods is a good one, that you form an image, and at the beginning everybody knows it's just an image, it's not the real thing. But they begin gradually to worship this image, you see, and after a little while they begin to feel the image is not merely a symbol of God,
but it's
but
actuality.
it actually is the manifestation of God, the living, concrete manifestation of God in that image. And therefore that image begins to dominate the person because he says it's God.
Could we investigate what happens exactly? I think that seems to be the crucial point. What happens in the mind, that he is mistaking the image for the perception. I mean, in treating psychological problems, for example, or which the question with God is the same thing. That what happens? What is happening to the mind that he loses track of the actuality, and instead of the actuality?
Are you asking, sir? If I understand, I want to understand you. Why doesn't the mind stay with the actual?
Yes.
And not create an image of the actual and get caught up in that image and worship that image and so on, run away. In fact, why doesn't the mind stay with the fact?
Well, but in some areas the image is part of the fact. You see, it's a little bit difficult.
I know. I'm just exploring it.
Yeah, and the question is, why does the mind slip over and into those areas where the image is not part of the fact? You see, that's very subtle, because in some cases you must use the image.
Yes, we agreed there.
But people religiously are treating, for example, the problem in the same as they would practically. They're saying, if we are suffering, it's because we have offended God. The practical approach is to please God by offering Him sacrifices, you see.
Yes, old primitive idea, and all the rest of it. So, are we saying that because we are incapable of facing the fact and observe the fact without creating the image, and gradually the image becomes more and more important, and therefore we worship the image and therefore escape from the fact. We are away from the fact, which is what I call concepts, conclusions, ideas, ideals, beliefs. All that is, if you can use one word to convey all that, concept. I'd like to just, if we agree to that, all that is contained in the word concept. That is, I observe fear, and then I have the image that I must not be afraid, and that the image gives me energy to escape from the fact, and so on. And gradually that image becomes, as Dr. Baum explained, God. I have not served rightly God, therefore He is punishing me, therefore the fear is right. And I can't escape from it. And so on and so on. Can we, right, sir? I think this is very clear.
Aren't we doing the same thing, though, if we say, why isn't man good?
Why is?
If we ask that question, why isn't man good, aren't we also creating a concept and escaping from the fact?
Of course. We said yesterday, if I remember rightly, good implies not belong to any good. What did we say? Goodness is cannot be identified with any institution, with any authority, with any and so on. I've forgotten all the rest of it. So if we accept that, then I say goodness is not an idea.
But there is the danger that we fall into a concept of goodness, right?
I haven't fallen into it.
Well,
I have denied all this.
But it's often very subtle, you see, that
Of
people
course.
slip into it.
Of course.
You see, it's the question that there is the actuality of of fear, but then I create a label for the actuality fear, which is the word fear.
Yes.
And then the next step is that I mistake the label, the image, for the actuality.
Yes.
So it is often for the sake of communication, it is very important, as in the case of goodness, to use a word. But is it possible to use the word and yet be aware that the word is not the actuality?
Of course, obviously.
But that seems to be, in that area seems to
Are
be
you
the
saying
problem.
then the word is not the thing?
Yes.
So that is obvious.
But in that area it happens.
But the word creates the image.
That's right.
That's right. And the image becomes a kind of thing, you see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what is the action of the image toward the actuality that follows? I mean, we
None.
have the actuality,
None.
we have the image, but the energy of the actuality, the fear is still present.
So just look at it, sir.
Yeah,
Fear
yeah.
or anxiety. Why can't we look at it without the image?
I was only going to go another step
No,
into that
just
image
look
making
at it,
process.
sir. Look. Without trying to escape from it, without trying to conquer it, without trying to subjugate it or anything. Just
These are the actions of the concept. This is what I was looking for.
What?
These are the actions I was asking into. The subjugation, the escape, the things you're saying don't do. That's what I was questioning. After we generate the concept away from the actuality, then those things come back on the actuality in conflict. And you're saying don't do
And that doesn't solve it.
It solves nothing.
So we are trying now. Let's come back again. You're saying the confusion is so very complex a problem, it cannot be reduced to one issue.
Well, that may be the case. Some people say that.
I mean, I'm taking that.
Yeah.
Some people say this confusion, the man's way of life is so very complex. There is no one central issue which will resolve the whole. I question that. I say on the contrary, all the aspects of this, however complex they are, must lead to the central issue.
No, then that has to be demonstrated, you see.
How should we demonstrate it? Through argument? Through verbal communication? Through my clinging to an opinion or a belief or a conclusion that this cannot be solved because it's too complex?
Yes, well, I think that's the key point to the answer would be that the person who believes that the issues are multitudinous, that in itself is a conclusion or a concept.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And it has to be questioned. But then he might argue, he might say your belief in the one central issue might be another concept.
No, it's not a concept. I'm asking.
Yes.
I'm questioning. I don't say there is or there is not.
Yeah, well then we have two possibilities.
Yes, when we are inquiring, it's a possibility.
So it's a question of making it clear, if we can.
Yes, sir.
Right.
We are saying, many people say, as Dr. pointed out, that as human society is so dreadfully complex, it cannot be solved by one central problem or central issue. You have to examine all the various aspects of it, if you can, and if you examine the various aspects of it, perhaps you will never be able to solve it. It'll be impossible.
Yes, or perhaps it's not so much a question of having to examine many different aspects, but if it does turn out to be something multidimensional and not one single issue, that one would have to deal with them all simultaneously. That's another possibility.
Yes, I understand that.
Right.
Multidimensional issues, therefore, it cannot possibly be solved by one central investigation.
That's what we're questioning.
That's what we are saying. We're all saying the same thing. And you come along and say, no, so that way you will never solve anything. You must have an insight into the whole of it. Right, sir? Not insight into one little part. The scientist has his insight, but is partial. The artist's insight is partial. Right? The philosopher's is partial. The multidimensional investigation still is partial. And what is the instrument that is investigating the multidimensional problems? It is the mind. No?
Yeah, but Krishnadi, how do we approach it?
We are doing it now.
Could we ask the question, am I looking at all these so-called multidimensional problems? How am I looking at them? Am I looking at them again through concepts, or am I looking at facts? Because maybe they fall all together if I see that all the problems I create are conceptual problems and not actual problems.
So just take one problem, which is no institution, organization of any kind, political, religious, economic, social, or any institution is not going to solve the problem, our human problem. I say that.
Maybe it becomes easier to see that if we, instead of looking at the problem
investigate that one problem and have an insight into it.
I just say, if one sees it in relation to one's own action, is it possible to be good here in my situation?
No, we don't. So, institutions, Catholic institution, Labour Party, Conservative Party, Democratic Party, Republican Party, the Communists, and so on and so on. Have they solved the human problems? You answered, sir. You don't have to. It's not very difficult, this.
Obviously not.
No. So I've discovered something. That is, no institution is going to save man.
No, Krishnaji, I think one can only say at that point, if one looks at it as we have said, that in the past they have not solved the problem. But unfortunately, man still has the hope that he has to create another institution which will.
No, but if I have understood that institution, whether it's in the future or in the past or in the present, is not going to solve my problems, human problems, or whether it is most marvelous utopia, is not finished. I won't join it, I won't come into it.
Yeah, but that makes another step to go from the past fact to a general notion. You must be bringing in an insight already that institutions cannot do it, no matter what they are.
Exactly.
Which implies that there's a principle in the nature of institutions that makes it impossible for institutions to solve human problems.
I don't quite follow this.
The implication is that there's a principle in the nature of institutions, for instance, that it's their structures.
Reason shows it, logic shows it, and you see something directly. You don't have to go through all this. You see, institutions cannot solve it. They've had institution for 2,000 years, the Catholic world. It hasn't solved human problems.
No.
Didn't we arrive at a point just a bit ago where we saw the mind moving away from the fact, moving into a field of complexity, away from the fact, and isn't the institution, the principle perhaps you're looking for, the institution, the manifestation of that complexity? I mean,
Well, if we say that the institution can't solve the problem, then we seem to be stuck with something else, that the mind keeps building up structures even then,
away from the fact.
trying to continue, which perhaps means that we haven't seen that.
So God has not solved our problems. We have worshipped Him, we have called Him by different names, we have different idols, different images, different symbols of God. And this God, through the multiple institutions that man has invented, has not solved our human problems.
But I think we have to see the insight as to why it is impossible. And see, one could say perhaps that institutions require a concept.
Of course.
And that means acting from a concept, right? And
institutions are based on concepts.
Yeah. And therefore they cannot actually meet the human problem. They might meet some practical problem.
Yeah, but that again...
That's different. Right?
Yes, and the thing is, the institution implies necessarily a division. It implies a division.
Quite.
In other words, you don't have to look into the past and see that they haven't worked, but that in principle they cannot work. Because
that's what I'm saying.
right,
They cannot work.
They cannot work because in principle they are a division.
So, now just wait. So, in the same way, can we have an insight or series of logical investigations which might help to bring about insight into the whole multi-dimensional complexities of man? Oh, it's come off. Sorry. My God.
Sir, is that not an important fact to see, that to arrive at a conclusion about institutions is not the way to do it, but to see actually that right now, every day, the institutions do not work?
That's all right. But don't belong to institutions, don't be influenced by it.
But I think that won't close the subject, because some people will still be proposing new institutions that might work. So that it continually comes up. The communists came along and said the capitalist institutions don't work, but the institutions we want to make will work. Now,
yes, of course.
If the communist is no good, then somebody else comes along and says, no, the communists are no good, but some other one will work. So I think we have to see and have an insight as to what it is about institutions, so that it couldn't possibly work.
Well, you were saying that the practical, the concepts work in something like a practical field, but they don't work in human affairs.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have a tendency? We seem to have a tendency then to look at human affairs as a practical problem.
That's
good, isn't it? Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yes. And it's also God is a practical problem. You have to placate.
Also, they say you haven't done the things which God wished you to.
Yeah,
that's why God cannot help you.
And therefore, you must find ways of pleasing God. See, the practical approach is to find out what God wants and give it to Him.
Yes, sir.
But sir, isn't there a danger of someone like yourself who's pointing out that no institution can solve our problems, and then creating a concept out of just one person saying this and informing the authority?
Oh, no, I mean, today here we are investigating. There is no authority here.
But the danger is there that we create the concept out of because we think of institution as something of a group, and then one person denying this could also become a concept.
Surely, sir.
Can we? I just wanted to pursue my own question, that why can we show clearly that human affairs are not a practical affair to be solved by concepts?
We just now did it, sir.
No, it's not clear to me why a human being can't be treated as a practical affair. As a problem to be solved.
Human beings?
Yes.
They're psychological problems.
Huh?
That's why isn't a psychological problem the same as a practical problem?
Oh, is that
it? Or even social.
Or a social problem.
Mm-hmm. And there's an enormous school now in behaviorism and so on that makes technology of man.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. Technology of psychology.
That's quite true. The behaviorists are doing it that way. They say if you condition people to be good, they'll be good.
Yes. Good.
Well, we have that school of behaviorists, and which is an indication that this problem which you are raising is really a very, very difficult problem, which up to now it really seems that man has not solved. So can we maybe dwell on that problem for a while and really make sure, in quotes, that we have an insight into that question that no institution will solve the problems of man?
Because the institutions are based on concepts.
Well, we have to be clear that concepts cannot solve social problems and psychological problems.
That's right.
Cannot bring about a good man.
Yeah.
Or have an institution and then fit man to that institution. That's what they're doing, communists are doing.
But it seems, a typical problem would be, say, fear, to say, is there any practical approach to fear, you see, as a question. Some people believe there is. You see, they have prescriptions for how to deal with fear.
And they work.
They work up to a point.
Suppress it.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't part of the problem that if there are no institutions, no concepts, then we have to meet the problems somehow immediately with our whole being, and somehow or other people run away from that. There's an insecurity.
That's what we are saying, sir.
I think that we have to have an insight, the common insight into this point that there really is no escape. Otherwise the mind will continually try to escape.
Quite. Now how do we have insight? How does a human being have an insight into the whole nature of institution? Which means, having an insight, he can then logically explain. But logical explanation will not lead you to have insight. That we must be clear. I don't know if that's clear. Do we see that?
It's not so clear to me, because sometimes one can see the steps and then seeing the whole order, you see the whole. So it's not quite so clear, I feel.
It has nothing to... No, we are saying through logic, reason, sanity, clarity, one may not have insight. But if one has an insight, then you can logically explain that which you have discovered, which you have seen.
I understand, Krishnaji. I follow what you're saying. At the same time, I'm not sure that it's not possible that all that, if there is clarity, if there is order, a logical order, that makes the conditions, if there's no clarity and no logical order, I can't see how insight
Of course, you can't have that.
So in a sense...
So Madam, we are trying to find out what we mean by insight. That's all.
Right.
What do you mean by insight? Insight, first, what it means, an insight into the whole nature of this complexity. What do you mean by insight? Having an insight in the thing.
seem to have established that it's not to think about the thing.
No, sir, don't assert anything. We are investigating.
Yeah. Well, I thought we had established that thinking about reason does not bring insight. It may follow, but I was trying to move to something. It means a seeing in. The word means a seeing, right? To see in.
Huh?
To see into the problem.
Yes. To see, not only into the problem, but also the very seeing of it, the resolution of the problem is involved.
So could we ask then, where do we look?
Huh?
If we're to see in, where do we look? Where is it?
You can see with your eyes, visually, but that's not what we mean by seeing.
Okay.
Well, go into it, sir. I'll take a rest.
Well, I think that it might be useful to consider the barriers to insight. You see that insight is not at all common. And
Sir, what's a barrier? Come on, let's go.
Something gets in the way,
Let's
right?
go into it. Barrier is knowledge, remembrance. Right? Which is remembering a conclusion and applying that remembrance to find out what insight is.
yes, well,
Concept.
it's basically to appeal to the concept, to use concepts, but perhaps not be conscious that you're doing it.
No. So concept cannot reveal cannot help you to have insight.
Yeah, well, that's clear because they're based on the past, on assumptions and so on, and there's nothing new in them.
Yeah. Right. Concept, I mean, if you have any motive, you cannot have insight.
Well, perhaps one should go into that, because there are many people who wouldn't accept that they would say that, for example, scientific research has to be motivated. And I mean, many people feel that great discoveries are made by ambitious people, and so on.
So you say of yourself that you must have a motive.
Well, some people say
I know
that.
some people, of course.
Yeah, they say the motive gives you the energy to
Motive
acquire.
gives you the motive gives you the energy. But what is motive?
Well, we have to see what's
It's
wrong
so
here.
clear. What is motive?
Well, it's clear motive is a concept, basically,
Of course.
which incites you to
Or
act.
a movement born from the past.
Yes, but fundamentally it's an idea which moves you to act. It incites your action.
Yes.
That it wouldn't say somebody has a motive without some idea. That's really.
If you have a motive, it will not be possible to have an insight. Because the motive is born out of a concept, out of a knowledge, out of the past.
Yeah, if you take a detective story, for example, to establish the motive is to establish the idea which would drive the person to
Yes,
do it.
right? Quite.
And,
Would interest not following that motive, a deep interest?
Oh?
No, that wouldn't be. Well, there's the difference between interest and motive.
What's that?
The question is whether motive is the same as interest.
No, not the same, but
or
would
related.
it follow?
Yeah, well, there's a kind of interest that follows from when you have a motive, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, there may be an interest when you don't have a motive.
And when there is a motive, the interest is twisted,
Yeah.
and there's a preconceived outcome, essentially.
Yeah.
Sir, you and Dr. Bohm said something about the concept generating energy.
We've been through that, sir.
Yes, but I think it is somehow related to this.
Related to?
Related to our question right now.
Which is what?
The relationship is somehow that we were saying, you said earlier that the concept generates energy, like the concept of God generates energies to fight a war for God. Now, I question this, because it would mean that there would be no energy if there is no concept.
No.
I'm just investigating it. I might be wrong on that. So, is it perhaps so that the concept misguides the energy, which has been there all along, about which we don't know? We don't
accept
know anything.
that. All right, then what? Concepts misuses energy.
Concept misuses energy.
Then what?
So when there is an insight, when we investigating the insight now,
Yeah.
and we have seen that concepts do not lead to an insight.
Yes.
But there is still the energy, we also just said.
Yes.
Now then, something must act on this energy.
Why should something act on it?
Or somehow this energy must be related to the insight.
Why? I mean,
Why do you bring energy into this, sir?
If I don't have any energy,
Of course, if you have no energy in the sense, interest,
I'm trying to
you
find.
just say go out.
I'm trying to investigate a question about which I'm serious. So I have denied the concepts, but there is still the energy to find out.
Yes.
And since it is not misguided by these concepts,
No.
then something else happens. And that we have given a word perhaps right now, and we call it insight.
No.
Is that not right?
I haven't given that. You are giving it.
Yeah.
Are you trying to say that when there is no concept, there is just the energy, and that energy may be the insight?
Yes, if that energy is guided by something else about which we don't know, then an insight comes into being.
So look, have you had an insight into the whole nature of institutions with which you just now agreed? Have you had an insight into it? Whole nature of institution, not just a particular institution. The institution of post office, the institutions of government, the institutions of religion, social institutions, and their pressures, and so on, so on, so on. To have an insight into the whole nature of institutions. Have you? Which means that you are not personally involved in any institution and not belong to any institution. You are free from the pressure of institutions. Of course.
Well, perhaps we're going too fast, you know.
Sorry.
We can't presume the insight. No, I'm saying that if you have the insight, that would be so, but then people may feel that they haven't had it, you see. That
if you haven't had an insight into it, then how will you get it?
Well, that's we have to look at.
I'm showing it to you. You cannot have an insight into it if you are under the pressure of any institution. So are you?
I think that's clear, isn't it? That
Post office is an institution. Therefore, it has no pressure on me. But governments have pressure on me. Religions have pressure. All the newspapers with their institutions have pressure. So I'm asking myself, am I under the pressure of any of this?
There may be a confusion because in one sense, they can bring practical consequences to
We
bear
said
on
that, so don't bring that over and over.
Okay,
We've said that.
But you see, there's a root of fear there, though. There's a root of fear in that if I am free of that there may be consequences that may be harmful toward my physical being. See, but psychologically, I see that they're irrelevant. Psychologically irrelevant.
Yeah, well, that's the fear of upsetting the apple cart. They say that if we probe into these institutions too far, the whole thing will be upset and will be physically harmed. Right? I was saying that we're liable to be physically harmed. You see, if we probe into the institution of government too far, we'll weaken the government and it may collapse, right? And then chaos will follow. So people say, we would better not ask too many questions about the government.
Are we then saying that most institutions have both of these aspects to it? They have the practical aspect to it, like the post office. It doesn't make sense to upset the post office because I'm not going to get my letters, which is a useful function.
The whole industry, really.
Right, but the post office is linked to the government, and the government has these psychological pressures. And so that it is both there. In most institutions, both is there.
Yes, sir.
So we want to remove one aspect of it. Obviously, we don't want to remove the functional aspect of an institution.
No.
So
I think the primary question may be, as Krishnamurti asked, are we free of institutions? Are we free of the pressures of the institutions? Our action which follows from there is another question. But first of all, I think we have to ask the question if we are free of it, if we have an insight into it.
So if you lived in a Catholic country and you don't believe in Catholicism, you will find very difficult to get a job there. Or in the communist world, if you don't believe all that stuff. So the pressure is immense. Physical pressure, psychological pressure, security pressure.
I think you could add, you see, if I'm reading some of the literature from Russia, that many people there understand how bad the situation is, but they're afraid that if they were to question it, the whole Russian government would fall apart.
Of course.
And then civil war and so on, and therefore they say we'd better have the devil we know than the one we don't. You see.
Yeah, hold on to what we know better than they are.
Yeah, and therefore they don't question. You see, now, that's one of the pressures against questioning. Right?
Yes, sir. No, what I'm asking is, do I have an insight into the whole nature of institutions? I cannot have an insight if I accept the religious institution. I won't go into it. If I accept any organized social institution. I know all the difficulties.
Yeah, you have to be ready for the consequences of it as well. Right?
Of course.
The insight doesn't necessarily imply any particular action, though. I mean, I see it, but it doesn't mean I have to stand in the street and shout against it or somehow call it down on me.
But it would, if everybody or large numbers of people began to share this insight, the whole thing would become unstable. It would start to break down.
Perhaps out of that insight, a new society can be made.
It might, but a person wonders. You see, I think that this fear has to be considered, right? That
of course.
Nobody knows what would happen.
Sir, to do the things that you're suggesting, don't I already need to have had the insight?
That's what we are saying, sir. How do I get an insight? What do we mean by insight?
Well, we've learned something about institutions now, and that learning probably constitutes at least part of an insight.
No. Sorry. That means you are identifying insight with knowledge.
No, I think I've learned something about the nature of some kind of institutions versus some others.
You have learned, what's that?
As he said, there are two aspects to institutions. One, which
we know that.
Yes. That is learning something about institutions. Being able to make that statement means that I see something.
You have an insight into institutions.
As far as I have understood that's all I can say.
Sir, when you have had an insight, is it so that you see the whole mechanism?
Yes. No. Insights. I don't know how to.
I think there's one point that there's a barrier to insight what we're discussing, which is all these factors such as fear and
reliance on concepts,
reliance on concepts, and so on. Now, it seems to me that having an insight consists in these barriers going away. That's essential.
That's right.
And from there you can see. And when there's no barrier to seeing, then you can see.
Can you have an insight through the operation of thought?
It's clear that
certainly not.
The thought itself is the basis of the barriers. Right?
Of course, absolutely.
It's involved in them.
So would you say there is insight when there is the absence of thought which has been investigated and understood?
It's a bit circular because it requires insight to have the absence of thought as well. That the insight must include the insight which brings about the absence of thought. Right?
Yes.
And isn't it thought that raises the question? That one must have the insight into. That's another problem there. I mean, what poses the question?
Well, that may be, but
no.
Is it? Well, that's what I'm wondering.
But we need the insight because we are inevitably starting out with thought, right? I mean, conditioned by thought.
That one could perhaps question whether the thought, what you're saying is that there is an insight necessary to see that thought prevents the insight.
To see the nature of thought, to see, or even deeper too, I don't know, but see, let's say that thought is preventing insight, perception, because of attachment to concepts.
You said that's right. But keep it simple like that.
Yeah. And now this attachment has pressure in it. And the insight means to dissolve that pressure.
Yeah.
Which cannot be done by thought.
Thought cannot release its own pressures.
No.
But when there is insight into the nature of thought, pressure ceases.
Yes.
That's all. And keep it simple like that.
So thought sees its limits.
And it sees the pressure which it generates on itself. It knows there's pressure and that it can't do anything.
Right. Aren't we moving again too fast? I feel I think this very problem with how in quotes, how can one have an insight into, let's say, the institution or the conceptualized thinking. I think that is still our central question, which we should go into.
So, just move from institution for a moment.
Well,
have an insight into relationship. Not only with the nature and all the rest of it, insight in your relationship with another. What's involved in that relationship? The consequences of a relationship. The whole structure and nature of relationship. Perhaps you can investigate that much more easily than institutions. I mean, when you have an insight to something, it reveals the whole map of relationship. Or perhaps you don't want to discuss relationship. That's rather dangerous.
It's all right.
It's not all right.
Well, the question is all right.
Of course.
The institution is still a form of relationship too.
Is our relationship conceptual?
Huh?
Is our relationship conceptual? I think we could start there.
It is.
Yeah. All right, and what's the root of that?
Huh?
What's the root of that? Why the root? Why is our relationship conceptual?
Find out, sir.
Aren't we once again faced with the same
Find
central
out.
issue?
You're talking too much. Find out. You said is all our relationship conceptual. Stay with that. Find out. Don't even talk. Go into it in yourself. Find out.
I'd like to review just once on the time of having insight. That means the removal of the barriers, which are the concepts, and there seem to be more, and I was wondering if we just review that once.
All right. I'm married. I have a relationship. What do you mean by that relationship? Just look at it. Be quite simple about it. Both physical, sensuous, psychological, intellectual, and comforting, encouraging, companionship, dependency, attachment. All that's involved in relationship. What we call relationship. Right? Proceed from there. I don't know if you want to discuss it, because it's dangerous.
Same as the government, to discuss the government is dangerous too.
Yes, but this is more immediate. The government is...
See, all this we accept as being natural, healthy, safe. So I say, being attached, what is involved in it. Dependency, what is involved in it. The sequence. You know very well what it means. Fear, anxiety, possessiveness.
Jealousy.
All this involved in it. Jealousy, hatred.
Competitiveness.
It's all that. So, when I'm attached to my wife and depend on her, and she encourages me to depend on her, what happens? Go into it, it's your affair.
It's a breakdown of the relationship.
What?
Isn't that the beginning of a breakdown of the relationship?
Therefore, it's not a relationship. Dependency indicates no relationship. I'm using you for my comfort, for my satisfaction. So I must possess you. And is that relationship?
No.
So, I'm not telling you, please.
There seems to be, even more than that, somehow there seems to be a kind of ruthlessness.
All that's involved, sir. Moment you are attached, ruthlessness, jealousy, the whole thing.
So can we ask if there was ever any relationship?
Why not? Why eliminate these things? You might have right relationship.
But it seems again that there's more involved than just eliminating these
Yeah,
factors.
what is more involved? My personal comfort, my personal sensual sensory satisfaction, my dependence and attachment, possession, domination, my desire to have somebody on whom I can lean, somebody who will encourage me. But add some more. What the point?
No, but I think the question is, how is one to remove that?
Well, I think there's another question before. You see, we've been saying that the whole thing is due to concepts. Now, what you said before would not all be accepted as just conceptual. You see, if you say my sensual,
that's right,
and so on, people would say that is not a concept. Now, we have to go into that. You see, if you go into that list, people would not accept that they're all concepts.
Which
the list you gave about relationships.
Huh?
That whole list, I can't remember it.
Add some more, subtract some, but it doesn't matter.
No, but I'm saying that people don't accept that is a concept, right? They say that's real.
Dependency is real.
We could take pleasure.
Pleasure, sensual pleasure. They say that's real. They say
yes, like hunger.
Hunger. There are several things
yes,
there.
Yes, agreed.
Remember, yeah.
Then what are you trying to tell me?
Well, I'm saying we have to clear that up because, see, if people feel that, if you've been implying that as a mere concept, if it is only a concept, it's clear that an insight could remove it.
But I'm not at all sure it's not concept, the whole of it.
It may be, but we have to go into that because
I'm doing
it's part of our tradition that that is not merely a concept.
Of course, part of our tradition, part of our hope, part of our faith that's not entirely conceptual. It investigates us.
The sensations are real.
Huh?
The sensations are real.
What
the sensations of pleasure are a fact, are an actuality.
Yes.
That much is real. Now,
but isn't also actuality dependence?
Yes. And fear, and the fear from which it comes.
Isn't actuality attachment? I'm attached to my wife.
That seems conceptual to me.
Oh, what? That conceptual, attachment not conceptual.
No, attachment seems quite conceptual. Somehow the sensation seems actual.
So, sensation. From that pleasure.
Yeah.
Pleasure, the image. The image,
demand.
Which is conceptual.
Yes, and then the demand.
Go on.
The other person becomes
Dr. Paul.
One is sensory, one is physical sensations, and the other is psychological. Dependence would be psychological.
But it's actual too.
Well, it can be actual in that.
Dr. Bohm said.
But usually it's psychological.
That brings about sensory. That's not separate.
Dr. Bohm said that beyond conceptual, there is something much greater in relationship. It's not wholly conceptual.
It may not be. Anyway.
I'm telling you, may not be. And I say that may not be, I want to find out if it is so. See, so what I'm trying to get at is, if we base all our life on concepts, which apparently is showing most of our life is conceptual, that may be the root of this confusion.
But I think in relationship, things that happen seem so real that it is not obvious they are concepts. It's rather like the idol who seems to be a real God, you see.
Of course.
Is it not again like we have discussed for the organizations that are these two aspects to it?
Don't reduce everything to aspects, that becomes too...
Right, but we are saying there's the factual, it's like hunger and the sensual things between people. That is not a concept, perhaps. But then we are making it into a concept in that we are saying, this has been a pleasurable thing, so I'm going to pursue it. And then it becomes a concept. As it happens, it is not a concept.
It may not be.
It may not.
Or may not be.
So which part of our relationship is conceptual, and which part is not conceptual. Is there in my relationship with my friend, with my girl, with my wife, or with my husband, the entirety of that relationship, is it conceptual, or is there in that relationship a part which is not?
Well, sir, if I am listening to my wife, she has something to say, she has some problem or whatever, and I really listen to her,
of course,
then
yes,
that is the concept.
I'm not. I'm asking you. No, I'm not asking you personally.
Sure.
I'm asking: is there any part which is not conceptual? Is love conceptual? Is love a remembrance? Then it would be conceptual.
Yes. What we usually mean by love in relationship
I don't know what.
I think it generally is a concept.
Yeah.
Do I rely on my wife? Attached? Dependent? Therefore, all this, I don't have to explain all this. So I'm asking, can I have an insight into the whole nature of relationship? Which is not conceptual. Because if it is conceptual, it's not insight. This is much better to discuss this because it's much more immediate. Much more, not immediate, it's much closer. I want to find out what is insight. Not theoretically as an abstraction, but actually have that perception. I won't call it experience because it isn't. Perception into my relationship with my wife or husband or girl. So am I in my relationship? Is there any part which is not a remembrance, an image, a conclusion, a concept? Is there anywhere a spark in there which is not all that? I can assume there is a part which is not all conceptual. But if I assume that, it will be conceptual. So I have to go deliberately to say, am I attached? Am I dependent? Am I possessive? Am I? So inquire, you follow? And see the fact, not, yes, I am, but I like it, why should I not? And so on, the rest of it. So is love a concept? Has love a motive? It's rather frightening to imagine, to find out that my life, my relationship with another is so almost entirely conceptual. It's rather frightening, you know. Not only frightening, very depressing. I won't use the word depressing even, because when you see a fact, it is not depressing. Depression is the outcome of a concept.
I think people use the word sobering. Sobering is the word.
You know, isn't there a phrase in the Bible, Ecclesiasticus, or my son, if thou comes to service God, be prepared for adversity.
Oh, I don't know that.
It's lovely. Here we are, facing adversity. It's time, isn't it?
Yes.
Time.